Okay, everyone, the H1B guy here, and today, December 8th, 2021, I'm proud to welcome in for the second time Mark Pavlopoulos from Syndesis and Path to Canada. Mark last joined the channel back on April 1st, where we talked about Path to Canada, a little bit of Syndesis, and we got into GTS a good bit, and we're going to have that discussion again today. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't already, to please subscribe to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube and like this video so that I can continue to produce more content like this for you. I also wanted to mention that today's stream is brought to you by Syndesis and Path to Canada, the ideal plan B for high skilled immigrants currently in the US whose status may be uncertain. Of course, we've got a whole new bunch of content out there. If you go to the h1bguy.com, you can check today's live stream. There are links to Path to Canada, there's links to Syndesis, there are links to webinars that Mark has done with Daniel Mandelbaum, an immigration attorney in Canada that helps Syndesis and Path to Canada in their processing. I also wanted to mention today's video is brought to you by perm-ads.com. We appreciate their sponsorship in conjunction with Path to Canada and Syndesis. So, Mark, how you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me back on the show.
Awesome. Glad to have you. Really glad to have you join us. And you and I had the pleasure. I'm going to pull it up here. Last Friday, you and I got to connect in a little coffee shop here in
person.
In person.
In person.
You believe that? Yeah. So 2021 has brought back the in-person meeting, and you shared a great post yesterday on LinkedIn that talked about our conversation that we had, and the interesting thing about that conversation, really to no one's surprise, Mark, we discussed immigration both in the US and Canada for about an hour and a half, and probably could have gone for another hour and a half. It's amazing, a topic that I think you and I both eat, live, and breathe, right?
Exactly.
Is employment-based immigration, sort of cross-border as you refer to it. But one of the interesting things I think that came up from our conversation, and you asked me about this, was your curiosity around H-1B fatigue. And
Yeah.
I think that's an interesting question. And I think that when we look at what's currently going on right now in terms of immigration reform, you and I talked a lot about a Build Back Better and what I thought would be included in that. And again, we're still waiting on what is or is not going to be included from the Senate parliamentarian on immigration. And I think a lot of that lends itself back to this concept of H-1B fatigue. And you asked me, hey, what do I think it is? And my answer was, again, you look at high skilled immigrants, specifically from India. If we're going to talk about the demographic that's most impacted, 1.2 million plus. And I told you, an individual that has an employment-based green card that's sponsored by an employer is looking to wait roughly 3,800 to 4,000 days.
Such a hugely disappointing number to hear, and the impact that has.
Yeah. And we also talked about the lottery, right? And the electronic lottery, demand on that 300 plus thousand. And when we did our first session back in April, a lot of that was around failed lottery and OPTs that were looking to make a move. And another stat that I shared with you, I thought that really piqued your interest, was year over year, H-1B approval ratings were down 12% in STEM here in the US.
Yeah. It's like almost like the onslaught of bad news just continues.
It is. And I think that that's what lends itself to the H-1B fatigue on the individual side. On the employer side, you have this constant churn of extensions and amendments, and a variety of fees associated, both legal and government, right? Filing, associated with continuing employment as it relates to an H-1B visa. And we did some calculations. We were talking about some break evens in terms of, how long does an individual have to stay on an H-1B here in the US? What does that look like, in terms of if we were looking at relocating that job to Canada? So that leads me into your lines of business, right? And for really the last 9 months, followers here of this channel and this platform have heard me talk about Path to Canada a good bit, and also about Syndesus. But today I want to start with Syndesus, because Syndesus to me is more on the individual who has an issue and has an employer who's willing to help them. They want to move their job. And I want to get into that first. Then we'll talk about Path to Canada and what that is. So, I guess from my perspective, kind of a quick overview of Syndesus's business. Who's the ideal individual, the ideal client for you on the employer side?
Yeah, I'll give a quick overview. So Syndesus is a company. We build engineering teams in Canada for tech companies in the US. So you'd say, if you're looking at the services, you're like, oh, you do recruiting. Oh, and then also you remotely employ people in Canada. And then lastly, very pertinent to this discussion, you can sponsor their Canadian work visas. So I think of the ideal, as you said, the ideal scenario, there's two different parties here. There's the immigrant tech worker in the US. In this case, they have expiring OPT, last try. They are looking at a date where they have to leave the US. So that person, I wouldn't call that an ideal scenario. I would call that very unideal for them. But that's the scenario where we can help. So OPT is expired. There's no more chances. The U.S. company is looking, unfortunately, to terminate them when they leave the U.S. because they're going to be when they're going back home, they're too far away. And that worker is usually out of options in the U.S. And that work has to be open to the idea of a permanent move to Canada. So a few of those things line up, let's say on the worker side. For the company, they're looking at this person as someone who's a critical part of their team, someone who knows their company, is respected internally, and they don't want to lose them. So usually I'm having a conversation with someone from HR from a tech company in the US, and they're explaining how critical this person is, and also that they want to find a way to make this work. So all those things have to be lined up. It's the worker with an open mind to moving to Canada permanently, who has no more options in the US. But in this case, the worker's not paying any fees for Syndesus services. It is their US employer who is going to first pay for a Canadian immigration lawyer to help them cross the border, next pay for Syndesus fees to sponsor that work visa in Canada, and then long-term, the U.S. employer will be working with Syndesus because we're an employer of record or a PEO, which is a professional employer organization. We have the ability to legally employ this worker long-term in Canada. So there's also a commitment from the company. It's both financial and looking at this person saying, we want to keep them. How can we keep them? And Syndesus offers a solution for that.
So ideal candidate then for Syndesus would be potentially an OPT STEM that's expiring in a failed lottery, working here in the US for, anywhere between 1 to 3 years. I think if you're looking at that, or even possibly someone who's on an H-1B who may be tired of waiting in the backlog that we alluded to earlier, and has an employer that says, "Hey, I'm willing to allow you to work remotely from outside of the U.S." Is that right?
Yeah, it could be either. I think we find the numbers are slanted towards OPT expiration because
Okay.
the mindset, what we usually see is the worker themselves has reached a level of it's desperation because they're going to go back to their U.S. immigration lawyer. They're going to go back to their company and say, "Let's what can we try? What can we do?"
Mm-hmm.
And there's usually then a point of realization of like, there's nothing else we can do.
Got it.
And if that and that's the moment that's what usually drives this, because then there's a calculation going on from the company of, okay, well, when you have to leave the US for example, let's say next year on April or May, a series of events are going to happen. There's the disillusionment of saying we're going to lose someone who's valuable to our company. Then there's the reality check of they're going to be terminated. They're going to go back to home country. All that work has been the hard work, either for the immigration lawyers, the work they've done at the company is wasted because then they're going to end up leaving. So all those things line up for companies saying, I'm willing to take an unusual step to move this person to Canada or find a way to transition their job up north.
Yeah, and it's an interesting concept for me because I think if you look at talent acquisition as a whole here in the US and the amount of time that's involved with acquiring talent, training talent, investing in that talent, even if it's an OPT that's facing an expiration, the loss of that individual, then you have to begin that recruitment cycle all over again. And by the time you begin that recruitment cycle all over again, you could have the employee in Canada, which, I think if you told me correctly, time frame wise, 60 days was about the average, but processing has been, I guess, expanded a little bit in kind of this continued COVID era. If I'm an employer and I come to you and I say, hey, I've got this employee, I'd like to relocate their job to Canada, from a time frame from when I express interest, commit to doing that, what's kind of the average time frame around that?
The total time frame is 2.5 to 3 months. From putting the application together for Canada's work visa program, Global Talent Stream, to going through the steps involved to the work visa being issued. It is a little slower with COVID. It takes longer to do biometrics tests in the US. You have to do your fingerprints. So on the safe side, from start to finish, 3 months. Has been done in 2.
So 90 days roughly is the benchmark. You could say plus or minus a few weeks either way, I would guess, right?
Yeah, I'm going to jump back to a point you just made because I forgot to mention something. You brought this up. You said, look, there's replacement costs. There's workers who have been part of a team. When we usually have these calls, the question I'm asking, I'm usually talking to someone from HR. It might be an engineering manager, but they're in the conversation when I ask them, what's the replacement cost of this worker? What's their replacement time? You put those factors out there. Replacement cost, everyone's going to say like, oh, that's 50, 60, 70,000. There's some number that HR quantifies very quickly. And then there's the time frame to hire a new worker, ramp them up. And then I'm like, okay, that goes in column A. And then in column B, what we're going to put here is, as you said, 2.5 to 3 months, a cost that's significantly less than that. 99% surety this person will be across the border. So basically, I'm telling them, I'm giving you an option that in less than 3 months, for much less than the cost of replacement, you're going to move this worker across the border. They're going to take their laptop with them, and they start a whole new life in Canada. And the companies, and it's usually a scenario they haven't heard of. And then I turn to the worker and say, okay, column A and B. Column A is your U.S. immigration situation. You already know what it is. It's been made clear to you, but you don't want to take a jump to another country and enter another complicated situation. So I just spell it to them. Your Canadian work visa, it's a 99% chance of being approved. It's 2 years and renewable. By the end of the first 2 years, you will probably qualify for Canadian permanent residence. In 4 to 5 years, you will be a Canadian citizen. There's column B. There's your path. How are you feeling about this? And you usually see a surprised reaction from both parties, from the company and from the individual worker.
So Syndesus, if we just kind of go back and recap it, it is, you have an employee or you are an employee who either is an expiring OPT, preferably about 4 months out of that expiration, just to give yourself a little bit of buffer. Maybe you had a failed lottery. And I think this is a good reminder coming up because, March 2023, we'll be back to the electronic, lottery again. I think it's a good reminder for those individuals that are in that status. And then maybe if you're an H-1B who has an employer who values you, you're a permanent employee, but they may not want to do permanent residency for you, but are willing to look at, a different level of expense from an international relocation. What changes is your job relocates to Canada. It doesn't matter where in Canada. Is that correct? They can kind of choose where they want to live under the Syndesus umbrella. Right.
Yeah.
And they're an employee of Syndesus, but work for the U.S. employer.
Exactly. COVID definitely changed this. But since the U.S. employer unless they're trying to match. The only thing I hear companies saying is, hey, we want to match time zones. So one's in California, will say, hey, they'll suggest we'd really prefer that you be up in Vancouver. And then on the East Coast, we have people moving up Atlanta, New York, Boston, Miami. The preference from the company is, can you stay in time zone, preferably in Toronto? But again, they can pick anywhere to live in Canada. If the company says it's not an issue, you can pick any city that's interesting to you. Not a problem.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? You're talking about while it is remote work, it is within the same time zone. If they choose, geographically speaking, the right time zone. You know, a lot of times folks are really curious about costs associated with this, and listen, you know, it's not cheap. I mean, we're talking, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, right? There's an organizational fee, there's legal fees associated with it, but it's a great option. It's an option if you have no other situation. You look at what's the cost of recruitment, what's the cost of the loss and production of that employee, and you can multiply that and say, you know, within 90 days, I can have this individual stood up in a similar time zone internationally. I just love the Syndesus option, not only for the individual, but for the employer, and especially for those who don't have another option, right? We're talking about a denial or an expiration. And when those are the situations, the options to remain in the U.S. are very limited. So
yeah, this, as we both called it, it's a plan B. It's when your U.S. options are exhausted, or like you said with an H-1B, where it's like you can't see a future to a green card. The cost is borne by the employer. The worker's not paying for anything along the way. Maybe the relocation cost to Canada might be springing for, but overall, the numbers you threw out there, all covered by the company.
Yeah. And that, I think that's the key there, right? Is that's where, you know, that product or that business unit, if you will, Syndesus, you know, provides the value to the employers and the extended value to the employee. So how did you come up with that concept of Syndesus?
The background is, it took a while to put the pieces together. So I've worked for 7 VC-backed startups in Silicon Valley and Canada. And then even though I'm an American from California, I also live in Canada twice. So I was on student visas. I got my MBA in Canada. And 2 years later, came right back to Silicon Valley, like Holmes, California. You know, it was joined a startup and then ended up living in Toronto randomly for a few years, worked in venture capital, another Canadian tech company, then came home. But that perspective was planted because I met a lot of Canadians who were in tech, and they're just like, hey, look, Holmes, California, but I'm jealous of all my friends who moved. They have these cool tech jobs. And I'm like, what if I could bring tech jobs to you? And then I put that together with my friends who were starting companies, who were CTOs or VP engineering. So they're like, it's too hard to hire here in the US. You know, it's hard to compete with Google and Facebook. And then, you know, offshore teams are too far away. And I was just like, what about Canada? And the reaction was always like a positive one of people like, oh, I didn't think of that. And then they would say things like, oh, but it's complicated in Canada, Mark. You know, it's like France, you can't fire anyone, you know, and all those things. I'm like, no, not true. I worked up there for years. And then I realized, okay, wait, I have that knowledge I can trade off of. I can solve a problem. So that's where the first part of the iteration of the company was. I'm a remote employer in Canada for US companies. They don't have to set up operations up there. But as a remote employer and as a Canadian corporation, that gave me rights. Then, as I found out years later, when I was asked to move someone to Canada, Canadian immigration lawyer said, hey, we have this cool new program, Global Talent Stream. Hey, look, you can qualify for this, and you can get permission from the Canadian government to sponsor people to move up into your employment organization. And that kind of, I wouldn't have thought of this, Robert. When I set this up, my original vision 7 years ago was, I'll build engineering teams in Canada, and I'll be a remote employer in Canada. And then a few years back, I found out that I can also be a sponsor for Canadian work visas.
Yeah, and then that leads into kind of the next line of business, right? And the next service offering, which is the Path to Canada avenue. And that is more for the individual who says, I'd like to look for organizations that want to bring me to Canada under kind of the same process, which is the GTS process. But the
Yes.
Path to Canada line is more in what I would say it's a recruitment firm, right?
You're right. I got the idea basically because after I'd have to see for Syndesis, everything has to line up. You have to have the company saying, we're going to do this, we're going to pay for this. This is a tech worker that we value. Then you have the individuals saying, okay, look, this is going to help me. I can't stay in the US. That has to line up. What I noticed, and I have permission from Canadian Immigration Services to move like 50 people, and I can always move more. But what I also noticed was I spoke to a lot of people who said, Mark, my company's not on board, or I'm working for a big company, like a big, Fortune 500, and I can't get the L1 I can't get the transfer to Canada. I'm on my own. And what I kept hearing from a lot of people was, this sounds great, but I don't have the company that will back me on this. I realized, okay, wait, you need your own way to get to Canada without having a company to move you and pay for everything. And what I also realized was many US companies have set up operations in Canada, and there's a shortage of talent with all the Canadian companies. So there are many, many Canadian companies that are desperately looking for talent. And that's where I realized, okay, wait, I could move hundreds of people across the border. It's recruiting, as you exactly said. It's what I basically built as a marketplace. So my customer becomes the Canadian tech companies who are, when I tell them, hey, do you want US educated, US experienced engineers who face extremely long wait times for a green card in the US and want to move to Canada? And the answer is always an excited yes, but we don't know how to find those people. We have no idea. We heard, the immigration in the US is, that there's a lot of challenges there, but we read the news, but we don't know how to find them. And I'm like, oh, okay, what I can do is I can build a vetted database. I can bring both of you together. So you're right. It is recruiting, because from the Canadian company's point of view, they'll tell us I need a data scientist, I need 4 full stack engineers, I need C#. They're telling us what we need. And then in the US, we're basically reaching out to people in the immigrant tech community saying, look, if you have a long wait for a green card, if it's an impossibly long wait, and you do, and that's not how you want to live your life, let's apply to Path to Canada, join the database. We'll interview you. We'll find out more about your tech skills, and then we will connect you with a Canadian tech company. They'll interview you. They'll hire you. They sponsor your work visa, no cost at all to you. There's zero cost in this. But I think what I realized is, if you look at the pool of H-1B or just tech workers in the US or immigrants, 1, 2 or 3% have a company that could actually do what Syndesis does and help them move over. The other 98 or 99% are going to say, Mark, my company won't do that. I'm like, yeah, you're on your own, but you shouldn't be on your own. Here's a way where we can vet the companies. So my team is talking to Canadian companies, getting them signed up on this, educating them on the US immigration system and saying, here's why the situation people are in. And then we're also doing video interviews with the workers. So we're not throwing you into a database. We actually do video interviews, a couple of 30-minute interviews to find out, who you are, what's your motivation for moving to Canada. We help educate you on Canadian immigration options. And then once the person's bought in enough, then we put them into our database and connect them up with Canadian companies that are eager to hire them.
And that process that's no cost to the employee, right? It's a free service. You're compensated on the other side from the Canadian employer, from the employee perspective. And then, very similarly, it's the GTS entry into Canada, right? You kind of go through that. So same process, then again, looking at about 90 days on that from an offer acceptance. Do Canadian companies understand, though, that, hey, this individual's, if they're in the US, it's 90 days? And I think you told me you've had some success with folks that have worked in the US that now are outside of the US that wanted to get back into the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah, it's originally, I thought that when I started this 2 years back, my thought was, okay, it's going to be the same group of people. Probably it's OPT expirations and people who don't have a company can move them. To my surprise, when I talk to my recruiting team now, their feedback is, they said, Mark, 80% of the people in the database are in the US currently, but the other 25% had to leave over the last 3 to 12 months. They're mostly back in India, some in Singapore, some Pakistanis. They've had to leave. And the U.S. option is closed, but then they see what you're offering. So yeah, it's like, yeah, we can help you too. There's no limitation. You don't have to be in the U.S. So we're getting more international people that have had to leave the U.S. or maybe have never been. But the focus we originally did is H-1Bs, and that's the other thing I discovered was the majority of people for Path to Canada they have their H-1B. but they have, like you said, that 3,800, 4,000 day notice where they're anywhere from mid-20s to mid-40s, and they're like, I'm not going to get my green card. And then they see one of our events, and we spell out to them, hey, look, this immigration work visa in Canada. If you're a tech worker, you have to be have a STEM degree or be, hardware, software engineer, or the manager. There's a lot of different qualifications. But if that's you, and you're anywhere from mid-20s to mid-40s, and you're not going to get a green card, here's what can happen in Canada. You get a 2-year work visa, renewable. It comes with an open work visa for your spouse. They can work for anyone. Unlike the H-4, there's no limitations on the Canadian work visa for a spouse or partner. And then by the end of 2 years, I always have to, I'm not a Canadian immigration lawyer, but for the most part, for what I've seen through practice is you get points for the offer letter. You get points every year you live in Canada. So for many people, the 2-year work visa, they're a Canadian permanent resident. And then they're on the Canadian citizenship. That's very different.
Which is about a 4-year timeline, right? So if you think about 2 years of GTS, and then going through that express entry, right, which is the points-based system, having a full-time job in Canada, I think you and I have talked about, is estimated to be worth roughly around 40 points or so, just like that, right then and there. And so that's a pretty big jump when you look at the way the merit system in Canada works in terms of the express entry. What about those that are international for Path to Canada? Okay. Is it US experience that's really the key? So it's somebody that's been outside of the US or been in the US working here. And then if they're outside of the US, right? I know individuals that are currently working here in the US, of course, are definitely in line in terms of who would qualify. But for those outside of the US, they've worked in the US, but they're outside of the US. What's the timeline on that? And then, is it only US experience that you're looking for here?
When we started that, what we were telling the Canadian companies is US experienced and or US educated, engineers, tech talent. I would say there's some number of people in our database that either haven't been in the US. So when I think we're in the process of the current group of 10 people coming over, a couple of them have never lived in the US. So as I'm always informed by my recruiting team, there are super talented people in the database with amazing backgrounds. The Canadian companies are very interested. So yes, you might say 80% of our talent lived in the US at one point and may have gone back, but there is more international talent showing up in there, and that's fine.
And then I guess timeline, is it still 90 days if they're outside of the US too? Because I know they've got to go through the consular processing, I'm assuming, as well, getting the appointments and everything. Is that still an accurate timeline?
Yeah, there's someone that's coming over from India right now. We're getting plane ticket information from them. They did it in less than 90. So it is sometimes the only challenge is in your country getting that last visa stamp. That can take a little bit of extra time. And then if there's some COVID protocols, but COVID has goofed things up, but it shouldn't change it materially being outside of the country, outside of the US, I should say. But from US straight to Canada, that is usually the easiest way.
And then I guess the other thing with Path to Canada, with it being company centered, location sometimes is determined then by the employer, right? Versus if we look at Syndesus, you can kind of pick where you want to go, other than time zones, right? That'd be, I guess, another little nuance there.
It is, and we asked the question on the initial sales call. We asked, when we're talking through, like, what workers are you looking for? What are your challenges? We've done so many of these calls. We already know that the Canadian companies, they'll relate their challenges basically being Google Canada, Amazon Canada, Shopify. They'll list all the companies, either US operations or big Canadian companies that are hiring up all the talent. They'll say, like, look, it's hard to compete against. How do you compete against Amazon and Google? And then as we're asking them questions about the talent we're looking for, we always ask, are you open for remote? Because we see your headquarters is Toronto. We see your headquarters is in Montreal, or your headquarters is in Vancouver. Almost every single Canadian company has said, yes, remote's fine. Maybe we didn't believe that before COVID, but things have changed. We need to go where the talent is. We are not going to, demand the person lives in the city where our headquarters is. The majority of them say they're open to remote. So that goes back to the worker of pick the place in Canada you want to live.
That gives them flexibility. I think we're seeing that right now in talent acquisition here in the US is that companies that are offering remote versus even hybrid or on-site are ones that are having a less time to fill. Uh, just wanted to ask everyone again, if you haven't already, make sure you've liked this video and are subscribed to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. We will try to do a Q&A here at the end. So if you do have questions or comments that you'd like for Mark to address, please drop those in the chat. We'll definitely get to those. We'd love to take some questions from you. So please add those in. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the challenges with both aspects, right? The Syndesus challenges from an employer perspective, and then challenges on the Path to Canada side from the employee perspective. What are some of the challenges that you're facing right now?
On the Syndesus side, it is letting people know that this even exists. There are so many, like I think maybe last summer, it was May of last year, I was on the cover of the biggest newspaper in Silicon Valley, San Jose Mercury News.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the people that commented afterwards, some of the people who reached out just said, I had no idea this existed. We delivered bad news to the team member, the OPT, where they weren't picked, and that was it. And all of a sudden there's this move your job to Canada idea. So there's a massive learning curve there of most people in HR would say, hey, look, we did everything we could, and then there's nothing else to do. So our biggest challenge then is letting people know in the US, and it's a lot of times, Robert, what I find is it's the worker finding us. It's them scouring through Google or YouTube, and all of a sudden coming across a video where I'm like this, and saying, oh, you can move your job to Canada, and it's them going to their employer saying, hold on, before I leave, did you realize this was an option? And what their U.S. employer is going to say is, I'd never heard of this. Let's rig up a call. So the biggest challenge I think that we come across is lack of knowledge that this exists.
I just in the chat, I dropped the article from the Mercury News for you. Looks like that was back on May 21st. And again, news, I think when you Silicon Valley, it is the rag, right? So to get your name in there and having been in the Valley, I mean, I think that just shows you. We also talked about, I've been reading this book, The Global Talent War, and it had the billboard from Silicon Valley that was that is always referenced, right? Want to move to Canada, right? And so, I think this whole concept of Canada looking to attract talent in the US because of the fatigue, I think that's a great word for it. We're beginning to see that really occurring more frequently, right? And kind of going back to, was the number, I think I saw 400,000 was the goal for GTS for Canada, was one of the goals I'd seen that they had come out with a couple years ago.
So the 400,000, Canada usually, the numbers they've usually done is 1% of population. So 36 million roughly Canadian. So it's always been like 350, 360. The new numbers that came out from the Canadian government for immigration targets, it was like this is overall immigration, all programs. I think for 20, it was like 400,000, 410, and then I think it goes to 420. So that's like, they put some aggressive numbers out there. And for GTS, Global Talent Stream, the work visa program, I think when it was created as a pilot program 4 years ago, the comment was there's a shortage of engineers in Canada of 200,000. And we're just trying. So I don't know if I've heard numbers like 50, 60, 70,000 have been brought in over the program. So that's to show it's successful. Tens of thousands of people are moving to Canada under it. But I think what I would say is, if I look at the phone calls that I have with Canadian tech companies, I'm educating them on Global Talent Stream. So just like in the US, there's no knowledge of here's what's happening in Canada. In Canada, what I often find is we educate the Canadian companies saying, here's this super cool work visa program that your country has. It's low cost, it's easy to use, it's amazing, it's fast. And then what I have a lot of Canadian companies saying is, wow, that's interesting. We heard the name, but we didn't hear the details of it. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not just telling you about it. I'm actually going to tell you, I'm going to actually send you candidates that you can hire through the program. It's not just educating you on what it can do. We're going to actually show you how you can win and how everyone can win. You can get tech talent that you can't find in Canada, and you can change the lives of people who are in the US who are in a situation where there's no hope of green card. They move to Canada, boom, whole new life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in the article that we were mentioning, you quoted to say same laptop, same job, but they're sitting in Vancouver.
Yeah, that's for Syndesis moving their job up. Literally, that happens. Even during COVID, we moved someone up from Dallas to Vancouver, and it was basically packed everything up and said, "Yeah, I took my laptop, and then 48 hours later, I set up in Canada, my new apartment, opened my laptop, went from one COVID quarantine in one apartment in Dallas to COVID quarantined in Vancouver, and then just continued working same job, same laptop, same boss, same everything as if before." That's exactly how it rolls.
Mm. One of the questions I get asked a lot, though, and I know we've talked a lot about tech here in the US, but one of the most popular questions I get asked when I promote and talk about Syndesis and Path to Canada both surrounds itself around medical professionals. And, I know that that's not the space that you're in. There's a lot of different regulation involved in that. But I wanted to just throw it over to you, really quickly. If there is some guidance that we can offer for individuals that may be in the U.S., medical professionals in the U.S. that are considering Canada as an option, what are those avenues and pathways for them?
I wish there were better answers because, like you said, if you look at different professions, tech transfer is easy. So if STEM degree, computer science degree, all recognized in Canada. If you're, tech roles, your DevOps, C#, whatever you're working on in the US, easily transfers over to Canada. There's salary differentials, of course, but there's a hunger for tech talent. The challenge is when it comes to, we get this with business people too. We'll get these MBA profiles of someone who top business school, but they're in a sales or a strategic role. And it's like, okay, Global Talent Stream was about tech workers or the managers of tech workers. It didn't open up to people on the business side. Unfortunately, it's not opened up on the medical side. I think there's a frustration there, and there should be, which is, you get a degree as a nurse, doctor, dentist, anywhere, any medical profession in your country, you're certified. But with Canadian immigration, then it's like, are you certified in Canada? And I think in those medical professions, that's where you find, obviously, the Canadian medical profession making certain demands. I would hope there are changes because just like in tech, there are shortages, in medical fields across Canada too. I'm hoping for changes there. I wish there would be ones, but you're right. That's something where it is not a smooth transition, unfortunately.
Yeah, it seems like literally, every time we talk about it, it always comes up, right? Because, there's so many doctors and nurses that are here in the US on H-1B. And again, that lends itself to what you do through the PEO and through the GTS program. Well, they're always curious, like, hey, it is a global talent stream, correct? It's not global tech stream,
Yeah,
Um,
we should have the provisions for medical. That I would be so happy to hear that, as would many other people.
yeah.
Hope to have an update from you someday, but yeah, I haven't heard of many changes happening there in the medical profession, unfortunately.
I did kind of think about one thing that we talked about. The GTS visa is good for 2 years. Is that extendable? How long can it be extended? Is it indefinite? What does the extension process look like?
It is a 2-year work visa issued, and it can be extended in those increments. The question always comes up because there's a nuance to your question that I hear from people, and my team hears from people, is saying, okay, they want to know, like, well, how much runway do I have? But then the follow-up question I know is, okay, look, I was on an H-1B. Yes, I can extend, but it's all about permanent residence. So thanks for the 2-year work visa. Great to hear that it's there. Great to hear that I extend it. But now my follow-up questions which I always send over to a Canadian immigration lawyer. They're like, and how fast do you get PR? Because I don't want the same thing happen like happened in the US. I don't want to be on a multiple extended work visa. I want to know it's possible. You just told me it's possible. And now my conversation switches over to how fast can I get PR? How many points do I get for this work, and this employment that I have? How many points to get each year? And the Canadian immigration lawyers that we partner with, they walk people through that, basically saying like, here's your timeline. They can map out the timeline to PR. That's where the questions ultimately lie, because no one wants to have the same life in the U.S. indefinitely on a work visa. You want permanent.
The 2 year, 2 year, 2 year. They're looking for 2 year plus, 4, right? I would assume that's the sell that you have. So what is life like in Canada? You said you went to school there, were on a student visa there, lived there, 2 times. Um, Sprawling country, right? I mean, I think there's some pretty extremes from northeastern Canada to the western part of Canada as well. If I'm a high skilled immigrant in the US or somebody that's considering Canada as my option, what's life like in Canada?
It's a good question, because initial questions we get are always around, like, we'll be on these calls or webinars with the Canadian immigration lawyer, and we'll spell out like, okay, here's this work visa, here's this renewable, and then with the follow-up questions are again more work visa questions, are like, oh, my partner, can they what's the situation for them? So I'm like, open work visa. But then the follow-up questions are then, okay, can I build a career in tech? What's my career path going to be like for me? If the person's married, they're going to want to know what their partner can do, because sometimes we have a lot of people who are dual degree and one can't work in the US. I'm like, well, both of you can, it's your choice. You can work in Canada. Then the questions are going to come up. So the questions range from, what's it like to build a career in tech in Canada? I'm early in my career, my mid late 20s or 30s. I have a ways to go. So then we can spell out, okay, look, if here's the, and we'll be putting a lot of content out for this in 2022, basically saying, and here are the Canadian unicorns, and here's the number of the volume of VC funding that's flown to Canadian, that's gone into Canadian tech companies, and here's how some of them are growing. Oh, look, and here's all the US companies who figured out they got H-1B fatigue, they figured out global talent stream, and some of them have opened offices, not just Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Facebook, not just the usual suspects. Now you have Series C and D US companies who are venture funded, opening up engineering teams in Canada, saying, hey, let's take advantage of this work visa program too. So now for a tech career, I can paint a picture saying, look, there's one company sponsoring you, bringing you in, but if you look longer, there are multiple US and Canadian companies to work at. As long as the US remains restrictive on immigration, some companies have figured this out and said, we're opening offices in Canada, and that's where global expansion is. So I can paint a picture of great career opportunities. Then I can also paint a picture of, okay, you're there for the long term. You're going to want to know about schools, K through 12. You're going to want to know about Canadian universities. You're going to want to know that, hey, is this a good place to build a life? And again, those questions are all extremely valid. When it comes to Canadian universities, University of Waterloo is like the MIT of Canada. All the Silicon Valley companies, like half their graduating class goes to the US. I think it's a third or half. So there are great Canadian universities, University of Toronto, University of British Columbia. There are plenty of great Canadian universities where you can go there if you're looking longer term of like, okay, look, is this a place to stay and build a life? Yes. Quality of life living there. Great country. It is if you want city life, Toronto's the 4th biggest city in North America.
Yeah, I saw that.
Chicago. It's like Mexico City, New York, LA, Toronto.
But it's the only Canadian company, I think, in the top 10, or company, the only Canadian city in the top 10 in North America, I believe, is Toronto. And then I think I saw like Vancouver's in the top 25, I believe, in terms of overall. Would you say those are the 2 most popular destinations?
Yeah. Over half of all immigrants to Canada go to Toronto. It's always a destination. They'll claim to be more multicultural than New York in terms of languages spoken, culture. people from different countries that are there. But number two is Vancouver. So both of those is where the bulk of people go initially. But as you asked earlier about remote work, you have options. Some companies will say, go wherever you want to go. And you might say, like, I've heard a few people say, hey, I saw the taxes in Alberta are low and I want to live in Calgary, and houses there are dramatically cheaper than the other cities. True. All very, that can be a destination. If your company's like, sure, remote's great. Then you have people saying, well, then where's the best place to live for quality of life, or speed to own a home, or taxes? Again, you're working remote, you have more options of where you want to live. So yeah, all those, it's a good question. Why can't, like, the things that go in that people think about, it starts with immigration, then it switches over to career, then it switches over to quality of life in terms of like where to live, housing costs, quality of education. All those things are easily doable in Canada.
And then, going back to the culture, and you talk about Toronto as a destination, I think I saw that 50% of the city residents are immigrants. Something like that that's a staggering number. If you think about what that means from a cultural perspective, in a major metro city in North America. And being comparable to New York in terms of diversity is a testament to the GTS program and the Express Entry program, right, which has been in place for a while and rewarded merit with points and given extra points to spouses who are educated and have a certain level of experience. I mean, there's a lot to be said, which I've talked about a good bit here on this channel in reference to. Just wanted to mention again, Narasimha, we see your question. We'll definitely get to that here in a few minutes. But if there's any other questions, comments, while we have Mark for the next 10, 15 minutes here, please post those in the chat, and we'll be sure to get to them here towards the end of this discussion here. Just ask you again to please like this video and make sure you're subscribed here to the H1B Guy channel here on YouTube. Mark, I wanted to ask about a couple of success stories. I know when you were here in Atlanta, you were meeting with a client that was in the process of moving an employee, and I know that you had shared a couple of individual success stories via Path to Canada. I know some of those are highlighted via the testimonials on the website, which there are links in the description of this video. You can go check out my page in conjunction with Syndesus and Path to Canada. It has the testimonials and all the information about if you qualify. Do you qualify for Path to Canada? Do you qualify for Syndesus? But let's talk about a couple of success stories that you've had recently. I know you had mentioned an individual by the name of Chaitanya, I think was an individual that you had some pretty recent success with. So just let you highlight a couple of those right now, if you don't mind.
Sure. I'll cover one person for Syndesus who we moved their job to Canada, and then I'll cover on Path to Canada. So one person comes to mind. So I was in Vancouver last month. Tatiana's story is on the Syndesus website, but it's basically an immigrant to the U.S., did not get picked in the lottery, working for a VC-backed tech company in Baltimore that is integral person on the team. And basically, this goes, you don't get picked third time. You have a date when you have to leave the US. And I remember speaking to the company first, right, before the lottery, they said, well, last try, Mark, that's in, they were actually already a Syndesus client. And they said, we heard about you have this service, we're already employing people in Canada, but now we might need your service to remotely to move someone up. Let's see how the lottery goes. Well, like, fingers crossed, we want everything to work out. They came back a couple months later with the bad news saying, okay, look, we got the reality check. It didn't work out. And now we have a narrow date to make this all happen. So within 3 months or so, we were able to move her from the US to Vancouver. That's the city she chose to be in. And I was there last month, got to meet her and hear the story. And it's sad to hear the story where you see someone who came to the US, did everything right, and then along the way, things didn't work out. But the best part of the story is, okay, at a moment where the answer would have been, you're going to have to go back home, you're going to go to home country, to the Ukraine, it was, nope, you're going to keep your cool job, you've earned it. you now your company's going to move you to Canada, same job, same laptop, same boss, same everything, as you said earlier. Now you're sitting in Vancouver and you're on you've been connected to Canadian immigration lawyers. You're on a path to stay in Canada permanently. And Syndesis was able to facilitate that. So that to me is like we have more and more of those stories, and for us it's just a matter of getting the word out, and we can multiply the number of people we can help. On the Path to Canada side, there's I would say in the last 90 days, we're in the process of working with. We found jobs for 10 people, and they are all in. Some of them have work visas approved, and they're in the process of moving over the next couple of weeks. And there's one person that stands out. I know their story's a bit personal, so I don't want to share their name, but there's a comment that I heard, which was, this is someone on an H-1B who'd been in the U.S. for a long time, and the comment that what they shared with all of us on the Path to Canada team was a level of sadness, depression had set in of realizing that there is no U.S. green card. Like you got a cool job on the H-1B, there wasn't a future. And then a few months back, they had seen they'd probably seen an ad for Path to Canada. Maybe it's something on Google. They found us. They filled their name out. I remember my recruiter saying, "There's an amazing engineer who filled information out. The videos were, we video interviewed them twice. Awesome. There's multiple places for them. Let's get them interviewing. Within 30 days, job offer, a good one that was worth like, I'm impressed." And we do like this. So I got to meet them and I got to hear a little bit more about their story. But what I also got to see and what the team got to see was a transformation from, it's one thing if you're like, here's my immigration status, that's it in the US. It's a different thing of, here's a super cool job. You're on your way to Canadian permanent residence. You're talking to a Canadian immigration lawyer. It's all different. And there's a complete change in demeanor, in attitude, in basically like hope, I think was the best word. So those stories over the next 30, 60 days, there'll be more of them posted on Path to Canada. So we have a group of 10 people moving in, and it will be a quite larger volume in 2022 of people that we can help. There'll be a lot more success stories to share in Q1 and beyond.
No, that's awesome. And I think, when you start to look at that story, and as you said, in the last 90 days, the 9 others, I mean, those are lives that you're changing. And that's one thing for me and staffing, when we look at, as recruiters and recruiting firms, whether that's here in the US or, assisting with migration, relocation to Canada on employment-based merit, you're changing lives. And, that story that you just told, if you spend any time on hashtag immigration Twitter, right, you'll see the fatigue that exists in the H-1B culture and the H-1B population. And it's extremes, right? It's folks that have been here that said, I would never do it again, knowing what I know. And then it's others that say, I came here and I'm willing to wait because I'm here. I've spent, my year 25 through 35 already in the US. I have a family here, and now I'm here. And I think when we start to look at demographics and individuals that for you are in line with the process, it's a pretty wide range. I mean, I think you can look at folks that are 1 to 2 years out of a master's program to maybe folks that have 10 to 15 years of experience. And so that's a pretty wide range that you can cover when we look at candidates and candidate pools for you to draw into. Success stories, though, as a company owner and the individual who had this concept to facilitate, this demand, right? The demand in Canada and the demand for the individual here in the US, it's very gratifying. And I love hearing those stories and really appreciate you sharing those. I shared the data assembly story from your website in the chat for those that may be watching this now or at a future date. Wanted to take a few minutes. We had like one question. I'm going to pull it up. I think it's a great question because it talks about, there are limits on employment-based green cards here in the US. But does Canada have a limit on the number of permanent residents that they would issue in a year?
I'll caveat that by saying I'm not a Canadian immigration lawyer, so I have never heard of limits though. So for example, Global Talent Stream, it's not about limits. They're trying to get minimum of 200,000 people in. There's only 50, 60, 70,000. They would, if you were talking to Canadian Immigration Services, they'd probably say, well, we need more, like we're far behind. The 400,000 target is a target to try and get all immigrants into Canada. What Canada usually does is they're drawing different people on a points level. They'll moderate what those points are. Like, well, here's like draws like, oh, anyone above 470, 400 for express entry, 472, 476. You hear numbers like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, anyone with those numbers or above, you're invited to apply for permanent residence. There's a whole bunch of people sitting below that at 430, 440.
Mm-hmm.
That's where earlier you get a job in Canada, either through Syndesus or through Path to Canada. That Canadian job offer is 50 points. Every year you work in Canada has a certain number of points added to it. So we usually saying I was under the express limit, you know, I was below that 470 or 470-ish number, but after 1 or 2 years, hey, I'm above the number. I was invited to apply for permanent residence. So that's one way. I'm not aware of a limit where Canada is trying to say, like we do in the US, let's limit it. They're just doing it volume. But so in a way, is that a bit of a limit? Yes. But if you look at the numbers Canada's trying to hit, they're aggressive, and they're that 400,000 target. They're below that, which just means they're going to have to get more creative. It's almost like the opposite of the US. They're going to try and find more creative ways to bring more people into Canada to hit the number. They're trying to hit a high, not a limit number.
And I would imagine some of that is been impacted by COVID too, right? And you look at kind of where they've been over the last 18 months in terms of hitting their numbers or their target numbers.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I forgot to mention that. So there are multiple ways you can cross into Canada. You can go on a student visa. You can go on a global talent workstream visa. You can get invited as a permanent resident. Those are a few for immigrants to Canada. During COVID, students were allowed to come in. All the work visas. So we were moving people across the border right in the middle of COVID, where the delays longer for immigration services, significantly longer, so a few months longer than usual, because all the officers were working from home. But they processed the visas and they allowed people in because they referred to tech workers as essential workers. That was the exception. But what they did tell us permanent residents who were approved, my understanding is they said, hold on, like you're on, like we got, you're approved, but don't come in yet. So during COVID especially, that group was put on hold, but the work visas were still processed. They left it open. So that shows you that even how important the Global Talent Stream work visa program is to Canada, it is considered essential for the tech workers coming in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that while you were answering that and talking about that point, we're talking about Canadian offer letters. One of the things that came to mind for me was the salaries, right? Are the offers comparable to what we see in the US? How does that break down? I'm definitely curious about that myself, right?
Yeah, the question comes up all the time. So when we're screening people with our video screens, like there was one caller, so I think over summer, who had said, I'm at Google and I make 400,000 US, and I'm that's my target salary. I'm looking to stay in that band. It's like, that is more of a US Silicon Valley thing. You're probably not going to make that amount. So we do have to course correct people on more realistic salary expectations. So yeah, is there a bit of a Canadian haircut, as we say? Yes. But we also and we're going to have more content on this, but the other side of it we're looking at is, take living in the US, and I've lived in San Francisco for years. I've lived all over Silicon Valley for years. Take the cost of living in Silicon Valley and what you get, and then take the option of, if you could work remotely from Canada anywhere, and what would be your cost to live there of housing. In the US, everyone I know has families is budgeting $250,000, $300,000 per kid or more for college. That doesn't happen in Canada. So I think a case can be made of, you're in tech, you're in demand, you're going to do well. And maybe the company that brings you across may not pay you exactly what you're looking for. But after 2 years, when you have your permanent residence, you can work for any company. You can go target Google Canada and Amazon Canada and the best of the best. You can find ways to increase your salary. So yes, will it take a dip? Yes. Is the cost of living in Canada, if you don't pick Vancouver or Toronto, cost of living, it can be less definitely than the Bay Area where I've lived or where New York where I'm living now. So there's ways to work it to make it equitable. And then lastly, what's the cost of the ability to be a Canadian citizen when the US isn't giving you that option? So when I hear people talking about how much they're making in the US, and I'm like, okay, you're on H-1B work visa and you're not in line to get a green card. What's the cost of that uncertainty that you have to live with for years or decades versus the certainty of what you get in Canada? Will you take a price? Are you willing to take a bit of a discount on your salary for that? That's a very personal question.
Yeah, it is. And as recruiters, it's the most personal question that we talk about is compensation, right? What are you looking for? What are you willing to consider? And then you talk about all the other options outside of it, and that being in conjunction, with the total package, right? Lower healthcare costs, things that, some of the other fringe things that we didn't even really get into today. But, I think, from my perspective, we talk about, why would somebody who promotes H-1B visas here in the U.S., partner with you and Syndesus and Path to Canada? Well, it completes the cycle, right? I understand that there are individuals that come here that run out of options. And, we were introduced, by our friend Roman Zelichenko, and really appreciate, his introduction, because what we do overlaps a lot. The audience that watches and consumes my content and reads my website is the exact demographic that your service assists. And so it makes a lot of sense for us to have this partnership. And from, me personally, I want to thank you for your trust in me, the H-1B guy, to promote your products and your product lines and their products that I believe in. And so, if you are watching this now or in the future, please use the link in the description below. There's separate forms for Syndesus and Path to Canada that can help you determine whether or not you qualify. But Mark, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your partnership and your commitment here to this platform. I really appreciate it.
Robert, every time we have a conversation, I learn something new. That's why our hour and a half in Atlanta would have been a lot longer, because I had a long list of questions. And I learned a lot from you. So thank you for having me on again. Very much
Awesome.
appreciate it.
No, I really appreciate it. And I wanted to go ahead and plant this seed as a reminder that Mark and I will be back again together on February 2nd, tentatively as of right now, again, 3:00 Eastern. But we're also going to be joined at that point by Canadian immigration attorney Daniel Mandelbaum, who I know helps you in a lot of your processing. And we can talk a little bit more legal speak with Daniel and really, ask him some process and get into the minutia around legalities and, issues that come up, because, you and I talked that the GTS has a very high approval rating. And, you look at the overall aspect of it, it's just the timeline right now is that it's 90 days. And if you're in front of that 90 days, if I'm an employer or if I'm an individual, again, you got to be, 4, 5, 6 months in advance, because it could take a couple of months to get an offer. It just is the process. So, so we'll look forward to doing that on February 2nd of 2022. Hard to believe that, that's just under 2 months away. But really appreciate you coming on the channel again for a second time to continue to talk about all the great things that are happening at Syndesus and Path to Canada. I wanted to just give a shout out to some of the members on your team who have been super helpful. Carrie and Allison and Jane and Tara, some of your support staff that I've had the opportunity to to interact with. Just really appreciate all that they've done here for me and for you and helping make this happen. So thank you to the folks that are behind the scenes and doing so. Really, Mark and I really appreciate your support and making this happen. So thank you all for that. But Mark, look forward to continuing the conversation. Just again, thanks so much for jumping in here this afternoon. If folks are looking to find you, of course, there's several means to which you can follow Syndesus. Syndesus is on Twitter. Mark's on LinkedIn. Syndesus has LinkedIn pages as well. Of course, their website, and all of that can again be found through the link in the video description here. But wanted to go ahead and close us out here and just remind everyone that today's stream was brought to you by Syndesus and Path to Canada, the ideal plan B for high-skilled immigrants currently located in the U.S. whose status may be uncertain. If you're facing an H-1B denial or OPT expiration, don't get caught off guard. As we talked about, 4 months in advance, you need to be thinking about this, if not more.
Yes.
The folks at Syndesus and Path to Canada would love to help you. And please, please, please be sure to use that link in the video description below. That'll take you right to a landing page that has all of their service offerings, and you can find out if you qualify. Of course, if you have questions, you can reach out to me directly. I can definitely help facilitate a connection to Mark and his team. But again, thank you so much, Mark, for the sponsorship. And also, stream is brought to you by our other sponsor, perm-ads.com. They're the industry leader in providing a seamless experience for employers and immigration attorneys navigating the complex perm recruitment ad phase of the labor certification process. So again, Mark, we'll see you back on February 2nd. With Daniel Mandelbaum. We'll begin doing some promotion around that, probably mid-end of January. May even look to take some questions in advance from some of you out here who are watching this, who may have questions as we lead up to that stream. So, Mark, wanted to see if you had anything you wanted to say before I close this out.
Just want to say thank you. Thank you very much for having me back on. Appreciate it.
Awesome. My pleasure, and look forward to the next time you're in Atlanta. And as I told Roman, next time I'm in NYC, which needs to happen because it's been too long, 3 of us hopefully can get together and make that happen. So
absolutely.
With that being said, just wanted to ask you one last time, please like this video, subscribe to the H-1B Guy channel here on YouTube, and click the bell for notifications so that you're notified anytime we post new content here to this channel or go live like we did here today at 3 p.m. Eastern on Wednesday, December the 8th. If you've made it this far and streaming with us, thank you. If you've made it this far and you're watching this at a later date, thank you for taking the time to watch my video and watch this interview here with Mark. We both really appreciate your support. And, I'm Robert, and I'm the H-1B Guy, your global source for all things H-1B.